The Young and the Restless Spoilers A Twist of Shadows. The complexity of Claire. Kyle couldn't stop shaking as the weight of the discovery settled over him like a storm cloud. The revelation was as horrifying as it was heartbreaking. Claire was a killer. He had spent weeks piecing together the scattered fragments of evidence, never imagining it would lead him to this dark conclusion. She had done it. Claire had taken a life. But why wouldn't she admit it? Why did she refuse to confess, even when the truth was staring them both in the face? Kyle knew something wasn't adding up, and as much as he wanted to walk away, to distance himself from the nightmare Claire had pulled him into, he couldn't. Not yet. The hidden truth. Kyle confronted Claire in the dim light of her apartment, the air between them tense with unspoken words. He demanded answers, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. Why, Claire? Why did you do it? Why did you kill Jordan? Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, Kyle thought she might actually tell him. But instead, she shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't have a choice. Her words only fueled his frustration. You didn't have a choice? You think that justifies murder? Claire, you need to take responsibility. I was protecting myself, she screamed, cutting him off. And your precious Newmans. Do you have any idea what Jordan was capable of? What he would have done to me, to you, to your family? Her voice broke as she sank to her knees. He was going to kill me, Kyle. He told me that. He told me he'd come after everyone I care about. Kyle stared at her, his mind racing. He hated killers, always had. But her words planted a seed of doubt. Could it be true? Could Claire have been forced into this unimaginable act just to save herself and the people she loved? The thought twisted his gut, and for the first time, he felt the slightest pang of sympathy for her. The shadows of fear. Claire's confession wasn't easy for Kyle to process. Jordan had been a dangerous man, that much he knew. But the idea that Claire had been living in constant fear of him, that she had taken a life to escape his shadow, was almost too much to bear. I didn't want to kill him, she sobbed, clutching her arms as though she were trying to hold herself together. I begged him to let me go. I begged him to leave us all alone. But he wouldn't listen. He laughed in my face, Kyle. He said I'd never be free of him. That I'd never be safe. Her voice broke again, and she looked up at him with pleading eyes. I didn't want to do it. But he left me no choice. Kyle felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to hate her for what she had done. But the pain in her eyes, the raw desperation in her voice, made it impossible. She wasn't just some cold-blooded murderer. She was a woman who had been pushed to the brink, forced to make a choice no one should ever have to make. A life shattered that night, Kyle sat alone in his apartment, grappling with the weight of everything he had learned. He had always believed in black and white morality, in clear distinctions between good and evil. But Claire had shattered that illusion. Her actions were terrible, yes, but were they truly unjustifiable? The image of her pleading for forgiveness replayed in his mind. I'm not a monster, Kyle, she had said through her tears. I swear, I'm not. I didn't know what else to do. But Kyle didn't know if he could believe her. He didn't know if he could forgive her. And most of all, he didn't know if he could ever trust her again. The thought of Harrison entered his mind, sharp and sudden. His son was innocent, untouched by the darkness that now surrounded Kyle and Claire. He had to protect him, no matter the cost. I'll take him away, Kyle decided, his voice barely above a whisper. Away from her, away from all of this. He spent the next morning making arrangements, his heart heavy with guilt and sadness. He told Claire he needed time, that he couldn't be around her right now. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored his own. The price of survival in the days that followed, Kyle couldn't stop thinking about Claire. Was she truly as dangerous as he feared? Or was she just a victim of circumstance, a woman who had been forced to make an impossible choice to survive? The more he thought about it, the more he realized there was no easy answer. Claire's actions were horrifying, yes. But did that make her a monster? Or was she simply human, flawed and desperate like the rest of them? Claire, meanwhile, was left to wrestle with her own guilt. She knew she had done something unforgivable. But she also knew she had no choice. Jordan had been a threat, not just to her, but to everyone she cared about. She had done what she had to do to protect them. But the cost of that decision was heavier than she could have ever imagined. A future in the balance. Kyle knew he couldn't avoid Claire forever. Sooner or later, he would have to face her again. And when that time came, he would have to decide, was she truly as dangerous as he feared? Or was she someone worth fighting for, someone who deserved a second chance? For now, though, he focused on protecting Harrison, on keeping his son safe from the darkness that had taken over his own life. But deep down, he couldn't stop wondering, was he running from Claire because he was afraid of her? Or because he was afraid of what her story said about himself, about what he might do, if pushed far enough? In the end, only time would tell. This story captures the emotional weight, moral dilemmas, and tension in Kyle and Claire's relationship. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments or additional details. Smiling face with smiling eyes, fractured bonds. Claire's breaking point. The decision to part ways with Claire wasn't an easy one for Kyle, but it felt inevitable. The weight of what she had done, combined with the lies and secrets that followed, had created an insurmountable chasm between them. For Kyle, the safety of his son, Harrison, came first. And for Claire, it seemed her once bright world was crumbling, leaving her trapped in a spiral of guilt and despair. But as Kyle packed his things, ready to put distance between himself and the chaos that Claire's actions had wrought, Summer watched silently from the sidelines, her emotions carefully hidden. She had waited for this moment, patiently, painfully. She had longed for a chance to reclaim the life she once had with Kyle and Harrison. Claire's mistakes, tragic as they were, had inadvertently opened a door for her. Summer's chance. Summer had always been a believer in family. To her, Harrison deserved the kind of stability that Claire could never provide. With Claire gone, Summer saw an opportunity to step back into their lives, to be the mother figure Harrison needed and the partner Kyle had once cherished. She approached Kyle cautiously, offering her support as he struggled to rebuild his life. "You don't have to do this alone," she told him one evening, her voice gentle. "Harrison deserves the best, and so do you. We can figure this out together." Kyle hesitated, torn between the familiarity of Summer's warmth and the lingering memories of Claire's vulnerability. But as the days passed, he found himself drawn back to Summer's steady presence. She reminded him of simpler times, of a life that wasn't clouded by darkness and fear. Claire's isolation. For Claire, the fallout was devastating. Kyle's departure had left her feeling abandoned and betrayed. She couldn't understand how he could walk away after everything they'd been through. But more than that, she couldn't understand why the world seemed so eager to cast her aside. The whispers, the stares, the outright hostility, Claire felt it all. People in Genoa City had quickly turned against her, branding her as dangerous and unstable. Friends avoided her, neighbors refused to meet her gaze, and even strangers seemed to sense the darkness that now surrounded her. One evening, alone in her apartment, Claire stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Her once vivid eyes were dull, her skin pale and drawn. "What's wrong with me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why does everyone hate me? Why do I hate me?" Her thoughts turned darker as the days stretched into weeks. She replayed every mistake, every wrong turn, over and over in her mind. She blamed herself for losing Kyle, for scaring away the only person who had ever truly seen her. But as her anger and despair grew, so did a new feeling, a simmering resentment. The resentment burns. Claire's pain began to shift into something more volatile. The love she had felt for Kyle twisted into a bitter hatred. She had done everything for him, sacrificed her own safety, her own sanity, to protect him and his family. And how had he repaid her? By abandoning her, by taking Harrison away, by choosing Summer over her. "He never deserved me," Claire muttered to herself one night, pacing the floor of her empty living room. He's a coward. A liar. He's no better than Jordan. The thought struck her like a bolt of lightning. Kyle, the man who had once promised to stand by her no matter what, had turned out to be just as deceitful, just as cruel, as the man who had pushed her to kill in the first place. Her bitterness festered, growing stronger with each passing day. And as much as she hated to admit it, part of her wanted revenge, not just on Kyle, but on everyone who had turned their backs on her. If they wanted to see her as a villain, maybe it was time she gave them one. Kyle's guilt meanwhile, Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed Claire. As much as he tried to focus on Harrison and rebuild his life with Summer, Claire's tearful pleas for forgiveness haunted him. He told himself that he had done the right thing, that he was protecting his son. But deep down, he wondered if he had abandoned her when she needed him most. "Do you think she'll be okay?" he asked Summer one night, unable to keep the worry out of his voice. Summer hesitated, not wanting to reignite the guilt that she could see lingering in Kyle's eyes. "She's strong," she said carefully. "She'll figure things out. But right now, you need to focus on what's best for you and Harrison." Kyle nodded, but her words did little to ease his guilt. He couldn't help but feel like he had left a part of himself behind with Claire, a part he might never get back. The consequences of betrayal. Claire's downward spiral reached its peak one rainy evening, when she found herself standing outside the Newman estate, drenched and shivering. She had come to confront Kyle, to demand answers, to make him see what he had done to her. But as she stood there, staring up at the glowing windows, she realized how futile it all was. Kyle had moved on. He had chosen Summer, chosen to erase Claire from his life. And no matter what she said or did, nothing would change that. But instead of walking away, Claire clenched her fists and turned toward the shadows. "He'll regret this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "They all will." A dangerous game. As Claire's anger grew, so did her determination. She was no longer the broken, desperate woman Kyle had left behind. She was something else now, something stronger, something darker. And if the world wanted to see her as a villain, so be it. But Kyle had no idea what was coming. To him, Claire was just a painful memory, a chapter he had closed. He didn't realize that the woman he had left behind wasn't gone, she was waiting. Watching. And she was ready to make him pay for every tear she had shed, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt and despair. The question wasn't if Claire would strike back, it was when. And as the shadows of her past closed in around her, Claire made a promise to herself: she would never let anyone hurt her again. Not Kyle. Not Summer. Not anyone.